on the policy insight discussing the African Minerals Development Center, entitled the AMDC Shifting Ground, a strategic foresight framework to transform African mining. It is a pleasure to host this launch as one of the co-authors with my colleagues, Dr. Dion Cloutier, head and steward of the Futures Program, and Ms. Letitia Gentle, the program manager and researcher at the South African Institute of International Affairs. We are very pleased to be joined by our panelists from the African Minerals Development Center, the interim director, Dr. Marit Kitao, as well as Mr. Mkululi Nkosimandla Grube, the programs officer at the AMDC, and key contributors to the content of this policy insight. We're also joined by Mr. Evans Rubara, director and principal researcher at Africa Transcribe, and we're looking forward to receiving their comments and contributions, inputs, as we discuss the policy insights and launch the paper, including the policy recommendations contained therein. Just a note that there will be an opportunity to engage in Q&A after we have some welcome remarks from Dion and a presentation of the content of the policy insight from my co-authors, Letitia and Dion. We'll then have a discussion for 45 minutes or so with the panelists from the AMDC and the Africa Transcribe, and then we'll open it up for Q&A from yourselves. So please do listen keenly with an eye to contributing some comments or questions, engaging with the panelists as the program continues. And with that, it is a pleasure to welcome Dr. Cloutier, Dion, to provide some welcome remarks to yourselves and an overview of the research theme that we'll be discussing as part of this policy insight launch. Thank you, Dion. You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Njeri Magiru. Thank you also to my colleagues and then the great guests that we have to share with you today here, the speakers as well as the other participants. We welcome you again, as Njeri said. Just a few notes from my side. I won't keep you up kind of too busy. I'm going to hand over to the real, the lead researcher on this project was Letitia Gentle. Just a few comments from my side. SAIIA gratefully acknowledges the support of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for this publication. And it's also been a great privilege to work with the African Union Africa Minerals Development Center, or the AMDC, to co-publish this policy insight. Just from our point of view, this paper entitled the AMDC Shifting Ground, a strategic foresight framework to transform African mining, is really about underscoring the critical need for long-term transformative and sustainable and collaborative approaches to reshape African mining options, practices on the continent. And we are really kind of interested in making sure that the key mandate of the African Minerals Development Center, as along with the many interested parties in the mining community and mining sector at large, are privy to understanding the dimensions that is at stake, the critical challenges and opportunities. Now, I'm just going to ask my colleague to next slide, thank you. So why do we talk about strategic foresight in the context of mining, especially also as a guide for the African Minerals Development Center? We have to have a set of headlights for driving in the dark. There's obviously lots of challenges in minerals governance, extractors, the mining communities at large in the African continent, but there's also massive opportunities. But when you are driving in uncertainty and complexity, you need a set of headlights. These set of headlights help us to better anticipate, to see farther ahead, to have a long-term vision, and also to be able to, watch out for something jumping into the road. So that's the metaphor we're working with here today. Next slide. So just on the kind of a technical kind of understanding of strategic foresight is the ability to create and sustain a variety of high quality forward views, and to apply these emerging insights in organizationally useful ways. For example, to detect adverse conditions, guide policy, shape strategy, to explore new markets, products, and services. So our attempt working with the AMDC was to really kind of attempt a process to add to the process that attempts to broaden the boundaries of perception in 4 new ways. We'll go into that a little bit later, but in general, strategic foresight is really about assessing the implications of present action and decisions, not about only thinking about the future and having nice visions and plans, but what can we do today to implement long-term thinking into our present-day action? So we have to look at the consequences of continuing short-termism and also and incorporating long-term visions in our understanding, but have real practical action about that. By detecting and avoiding problems before they occur, early warning and guidance systems, this is the work of strategic foresight specifically, and then by considering the present implications of possible future events. So there's, according to our understanding, there's multiple options about thinking about the future, and we have to have a kind of a proactive strategy formulation about all the possible options that might be there, and then also envisioning aspects of desired futures. We can't just hope for the better future. We have to plan and act and anticipate and reimagine new futures. And we need to have the scenarios that are bold and hopeful to help us get there. But as I say, they go hand in hand, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's all about creating better decisions, taking up our agency today. Next. So what was this research objectives for this specific this policy insight? It was to support the role of the AMDC in advancing transformative futures of mining across Africa, but specifically strengthening the AMDC as a center of excellence to work with member states, but then also to help the AMDC better navigate and anticipate the complex mining environment and act on critical signals before they happen. So this theme of acting before things happen and being proactive is the kind of a real emphasis we are focusing on. Next. Oops, just next. Yes. So this work of ours builds on previous several reports stretching back to 2020, when we launched the report on futures literacy and mining and empowering the African mining vision. We've also had reports on futures of mining and the implications of large-scale EV adoption. We've looked at the battery manufacturing value chains for electric vehicles. We've had kind of dimensions of navigating governance challenges for green or critical minerals and the supply chains, and then also looking at the geopolitics of that. Next. Our series of reports last year that we launched was a whole series on critical minerals, or green minerals, as we prefer to call it, especially in Africa. But in general, the topic of critical minerals is critical for Africa to make use of a proactive approach to understand how we should govern our minerals and make use of the opportunities embedded therein. So our series of special reports both explore the current barriers and enablers, but also help us navigate towards the preferred futures, as I mentioned, but also looks at new ways of thinking about extractives and minerals and to build anticipatory governance, and then also helping us find these systemic or strategic innovations and leverage points that might help us shift to the future we want. And therefore, we created a draft strategic framework so that we can work with a variety of stakeholders in building the type of interventions and policies that might be at play in different contexts across the continent. Next. So how did we get to the knowledge in this policy insight? We consulted with our AMDC directly through running a futures literacy workshop. And then it also builds on the previous series of all the special reports that we had extensive dialogues with mining stakeholders, the mining sectors and policy dialogues. And we had a variety of people that participated in that work. Next. So what is the MDC's kind of real intention? We want to support the four-pillar mandate of the AMDC, and that is in implementing the African mining vision, which is the large overarching, I think, initiative, while at the same time leveraging geological information systems, strengthening value chains, and supporting artisanal and small-scale mining ASMs. So we are proposing that with our strategic foresight framework, we can improve and adopt and build anticipatory governance and in these important pillars of the four pillars of the mandate. Next. So just to wrap things up, and then I'll hand over to Letitia. The value of this type of approach is to help the better anticipation, as we mentioned. It helps with policy innovation to spur new thinking, and we need to stress the importance of future readiness to help us better prepare and be proactive about possible options, both the challenges, the critical signals that we need to look at, but also the opportunities that are embedded in the many African mining sector opportunities that are there. Letitia, I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dion. You can go to the next slide, Karabo. Great. So our next slide is about why bold anticipatory governance. So the key focus here is to shift from reactive to proactive governance. And a very simple way for explaining anticipatory governance is to develop a system of systems. So that you can create this transformative futures by working together and rather through and gathering collective insights. And you do that through focusing on positive and negative feedback loops so that you can really be proactive in terms of the policies that will be implemented. Also focus on act early on issues to address the impacts before they grow. So the idea is also to really first test in a safe to fail environment before expanding or scaling initiatives so that one can get a better understanding of what would be the impact of a policy or the impact of specific actions if it is scaled within the larger environment. And then also the key is to have multiple safe to fail options and to really implement and adopt this and learn for a changing future. Next slide. So we've said that the AMDC is in an ideal position to not maintain the status quo or to perpetuate what we know, but to really drive transformative futures of mining. And while that is the vision, we look at the challenges facing the mining sector, which are complex, interlocking, and interconnected. I think it's very, I think it would be safe to say that, there's a plethora of challenges within the mining sector. And it's not just in terms of multitude, but also in terms of interlocking and interconnectedness, which adds to the complexity of addressing these challenges. Also, the need to create collective intelligence mechanisms. So within this interlocking and interconnected myriad of challenges, it will become very difficult for a person or a government or a regional bloc to focus and really navigate these challenges. So we believe in this collective intelligence mechanisms to really drive systemic and transformative change. lastly, the AMDC can adopt a foresight-led visioning process to overcome political and institutional lock-ins. And an example of that is the slow ratification processes. Thank you. Next slide. So Dion spoke earlier about the AMDC 4-pillar mandate. So the columns on the left, you'll see is our AMDC 4-pillar mandate, which is the AMV implementation, the geological information systems, linkages and value addition, as well as the focus on artisanal and small-scale mining. So we said, well, if you infuse this 4-pillar mandate with strategic foresight, what would that look like? And the reason why we say that the AMDC is breaking ground is because we can already see signs of embedding strategic foresight within their mandate. So a few examples include a futuring and visioning, which is to rethink traditional models of industrialization and prioritizing value addition. So with that, there's a focus to not follow, traditional models, which is more debt, but to look at alternative examples of financing AMV implementation. Then geological information systems, looking at scanning, designing, and adopting. We've just seen the online geological information systems to support the AU member states, and we'll talk about that later. Also looking at linkages and value addition, which is designing and adopting, which speaks to accelerating industrial development of the African initiative. And then artisanal and small-scale mining, which is scanning and adapting, which is focused on strategic partnerships and collaborative platforms. Next slide. So if we take it one layer down and look at, how do we infuse strategic foresight when we implement the African mining vision? So participatory foresight involves multiple stakeholders enabling proactive exploration by examining risks and uncertainties in the mining sector, and also focusing on accelerating the adoption of the AMV. To expedite national priorities and equip policymakers with competencies and methods for strategic foresight and anticipatory governance to better navigate prevailing and emerging risks. So we see the AMDC as a very good continental governing body to really drive the implementation of the AMV, but not in a very linear manner, but more focused on participatory foresight, which means working in partnership with regional and national policymakers. Next slide. Very exciting is the geological information systems with the African Green Minerals Observatory, which has already been, it's live, it's operational, which is a web-based platform that focuses on data harmonization, standardizing mineral resource reporting based on UN classification standards, and it also supports fundraising for international mining projects. And also looks at supporting artisanal resource management, to really drive a resource-balanced economy. So, so that one can fully understand what are the minerals that we have and make better decisions or informed decisions when contracting or when signing up partnership deals. So that we've got the information and would move away from that asymmetry of information where partners would render agreements to the detriment of countries on the African continent. Next slide. Linkages and value addition. There's obviously very much promoting linkages between mining and value addition sectors, such as agricultural sector. It's really driving or facilitating skills transfer and education. We know about the prohibition of exports of unprocessed minerals in countries like Namibia and Zimbabwe. So obviously by them taking those actions, it creates new pathways for mining linkages and value addition opportunities. The importance of mineral resources management and linking that to additional infrastructures. And then AMDC, with support of member states, can stress test options for value addition strategies. So that's our point of anticipatory governance, which is to not really go full on or scale initiatives without really testing it, to look at what would be the deep impact or the deep socioeconomic impacts of that. Insights to consider include multiple possibilities and impacts to help shape adaptable strategies. Anticipating shifts in the labor market. So we know about the aging populations in the advanced economies, and that should further enhance the scope for linkages and value addition on the African continent. Also to explore finance requirements and test innovative financial options. I spoke earlier about not following the traditional methods of increased debt to enable linkages and value addition. And most importantly, which is talent pipelines within the mining sector. And then also last but not least, but to focus on sustainable development. Next slide. Thanks. The last pillar is artisanal and small-scale mining, where the focus on initiatives is to improve skills and promote value addition within ASM communities, and to also expand mining industry beneficiaries and reposition role players and the distribution of opportunities and benefits. Also shifting from profit-seeking, especially within the private sector, to easing competitor conditions rather, for artisanal and small-scale mining, coupled with a more holistic approach to who gets the benefits or who, so it can't just be that large multinational mining companies accrue all the benefits of the mining sector. But we need to look at easing the competitor conditions for artisanal small-scale miners as well. Next slide. Thanks. We talk about our journey to ratification and beyond. To the right, you'll see there's a little graphic which says make a plan. So we pick up a lack of deliberate action towards ratification by member states, and it risks, perpetuating the current status quo, or rather reinforcing neo-colonial dependencies, and also divisive practices that hinders Africa's collective progress. So it is essential for governments to demonstrate political will and prioritize ratification to pave the way for a more unified and self-reliant Africa. And then to overcome the slow ratification process, the AMDC should be supported to overcome the continental harmonization and really drive, ratified outcomes. Next slide. Next slide. Good. So we've got a Mentimeter. A question that we'd like to ask you is, what do you think are the most significant barriers to ratify the statutes for the AMDC? You can either use your phone and click on the QR code, and you've got 3 options. We've requested a word cloud, so you can have 3 different sets of words. Dion's also posted the link to the Mentimeter in the chat, so we'd love to hear your insights as well. So just to repeat the question, what do you think are the most significant barriers to ratify the statutes for the AMDC? So please, we'll share the outcome of the word cloud towards the end. Karabi, next slide. So this brings me to my last slide, which is, so what are the shifts required, to enable foresight for resilience? I think a different way to put that is, what is our call to action? Because your actions today would then influence your future. So we have identified 3 broad themes, which is firstly, diversified pathways and ecosystems approaches. So not a one size fits all and not a one solution, but multiple diversified pathways, and having an ecosystem or a holistic approach. And the 2 sub-points there is to leverage shared resources and addressing the common challenges collectively, integrate environmental, social, and economic considerations into mining practices. Our second key theme is to rethink debt and financial architecture. Our current domestic legal frameworks lack sufficient protection against hidden debts and opaque resource-backed loans, dominated by unscrupulous lenders. The AMDC, international finance institutions, the private sector, and AU member states should develop a coordinated debt relief and restructuring frameworks to reduce sovereign dependency on volatile commodity markets. Our third key theme is supply chain management and value creation, which is a growing need for localized and agile manufacturing processes. The shift will compel communities to reevaluate their supply chain strategies and operations to proactively anticipate risks and profit allocations. Next slide. I think that brings me to the end, Jay. That brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you for your attention. Please do use our Mentimeter. We'd like to hear your insights on ratification. And with that, I hand over to Njeri.
Thank you very much, Letitia and Dion, for providing an overview of the policy insight and for the summary presentation, giving a few more details on what the content of the paper was, as well as the recommendations provided. I think it was very useful to hear about the value of strategic foresight and anticipatory governance and how this can be linked in with the AMV key strategic 4-pillar mandates. Thank you also for highlighting the importance of geological information systems as critical tools to enhance foresight-oriented decision-making, and the ways in which a transformative future for mining is linked to value addition in terms of beneficiation, as well as boosting artisanal and small-scale mining. To build on the endpoints there in terms of enabling foresight for resilience and the kind of shifts required, it's a pleasure to welcome our panelists to this conversation and to invite their inputs on the discussion. In particular, I'm very happy to welcome, as mentioned, Dr. Marit, who is the interim director at the AMDC. She leads this AU organization, this AU unit that is focused on ensuring that the minerals segment and the commodity strategy, as well as the Africa mining vision and its action plan, receive requisite operational support and coordination from the AMDC. And also pleased to introduce her colleague, Mkuu, who oversees the artisanal and small-scale mining portfolio, as well as is a part of the program management at the AMDC. And finally, Dr. Evans Rubara, who is part of the Africa Transcribe, an inclusive Pan-African institution that works towards supporting and providing actionable programmatic solutions. Welcome everyone to this conversation. Perhaps, Mkuu, I can start with you. I hope you are online. No, it seems that Mkuu is still to join us. Dr. Marit, then if you'll allow me to invite you to the conversation and perhaps share some of your inputs in terms of how you think strategic foresight and anticipatory governance can support the work of the AMDC. In particular, there are quite a few futures-oriented visions within the African Union, including the Africa Agenda 2063. So please share how the Africa Mining Vision, the work of the AMDC, also aligns to these broader African Union visions. So what do you think is the key contribution strategic foresight and anticipatory governance can bring to the work that you do?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes. First, I would like to really thank SAIIA and the team, Dion, Letitia, Jerry, and all of them for this incredible journey. This anticipatory foresight is not, how do you say, is not very common. But when I heard about it, I jumped into it because as Letitia and Dion were saying, AMDC is trying to transform economies, where it's a very complex mining sector, where you have stakeholders from outside global, regional, continental, sub-regional, and also national. And even with national, you have civil society, you have private sector, you have communities. So it's a complex undertaking, which requires, not as they're saying, just visioning the future, but foresight and having anticipatory governance. So we really jumped into this conversation, and we had some very interesting and interactive sessions with a number of stakeholders. They came up with those. I was thinking, wow, only four. Well, AMV implementation is large, but within that AMV implementation, we have governance, we have policies, we have capacity building, we have environmental, we have communities, equity, women, etc., which did not really come out from the four clusters, but I'm just saying that how complex it is. They, of course, talked about the AMV implementation, they talked about the geology, and it's not just the African Green Minerals Observatory, which thank you for highlighting, but we have a geological mineral information system. We have templates that we are working with the Organization of African Geological Surveys, a template to harmonize all these data. We also have AMREC Park, which is the African Minerals Governance Minerals Classification, which tries to harmonize and standardize the way resources are captured throughout Africa so that we can leverage to the capital markets. And just to say that we have a complex, and I'm really glad that they're already starting this conversation. So how, to your question now, sorry, Jerry, to your question on how we can use this foresight into the Africa Mining Vision. Of course, as you know, Africa Mining Vision is aligned to the Agenda 2063, and it aims to transform Africa's minerals. And how I see 5 points on how we can use foresight on top of what was already said, and reiterating some of them. First is scenario planning and futures thinking. Different outcomes based on various global and regional trends. As you can see, we now have, during the AMV time, it was just how to make sure that we get value out of our minerals. But nowadays, and it's in our green mineral strategy, is also how to have a just energy transition, because now the conversation has changed within this decarbonization agenda. And how are these changes, commodity prices, even these critical minerals prices are going up and down. Lithium has gone down. And what are we focusing on? Is there going to be stranded assets? Do we need to do them now? Technological advancements. And of course, the geological shifts. As we know, our world is changing very rapidly so we really need to incorporate these future thinking when we provide policy advisory or anything to our governments about the uncertainties, create flexible, adaptive strategies to navigate these challenges. Like I said, because there will be technological disruptions, shifts in demand, resource depletion, all of it that we can do scenario building, it will be helpful to our government. Second one is on policy, because this is our core mandate, policy and governance development. So strategic foresight can help us have forward-looking strategies, policies, aligning mineral resource management with broader economic strategies and mitigating risks. You know, this foresight can help us have foresight methods, for example, have, like I mentioned, shifting political, geopolitical tensions, but also climate change, trade partnerships, a lot of other issues that are outside, but also like can have impact on the inside. So making sure that we have strategic, dynamic policies along the way. The third one is regional cooperation and integration. It's also, you know, there's Leticia was mentioning about ratification. Regional cooperation, and it helps countries recognize emerging regional opportunities. And when you see that, and especially with development of regional value chains, there's value addition and regional value chains were mentioned. And that enables, foresight enables us to see not just what happens within our countries, but within our regions and what can be done, shared infrastructure. Recently, we have the conversation on the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia having specialized economic zones. Can we foresee this kind of approaches and also already try to foresee what kind of clustering can be done across the region, sub-regional regions? And of course, we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. How do we leverage that to really make sure that we get what we want? Because as Leticia and Dion were saying, we have to envision what is the outcome of what we want to achieve and, you know, be realistic, negative, positive, but realistically how we can drive that. So all of these scenarios are very good. The fourth one is innovation and technology trends. I think I've mentioned it. There's so many technology going on. We have to really make sure that we are in line. We don't, you know, otherwise we just focus on the wrong issues if we do not think about foreseeing innovations, trends, analyzing what kind of trends will be, and then positioning where our countries or our region will be. And the fifth one is, of course, the climate change and the energy transition and sustainability and environmental stewardship. We really have to make sure that we integrate foresight tools. We have the environmental impact assessments, but more than that, we have to really foresee what are the life cycle of the whole minerals and then foresee ourselves, because we really want to make sure that we are not repeating the mistakes of the past and pollute. But what are the clean, smart ways of achieving our goals? So in all of that, what is the role of the AMDC? Is we provide policy and institutional support. So this foresight enables us to have, like I said, proactive policies to at least, you know, propose to governments about the strategic dynamic policies, capacity building. I don't think I mentioned the skills, but also we need to have foresee what kind of skills will be available. This is linked to technology, but more than that, kind of skills will be available, and also provide very targeted kind of support to our government. Data and research coordination. Again, you mentioned the Africa Green Minerals Observatory and the Geological Mineral Information Systems, but a lot of data is needed. So we really need to foresee and see what kind of data will be available and propose solutions based on those ones. And again, promote regional cooperation, and, you know, it will increase our advisor or our raison d'etre if we foresee, we provide solutions for future thinking, if we provide that kind of advisory to our governments. I'll stop here. I don't want to take too much time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Marit, for really highlighting the transformative role of the AMDC in a futures of mining for the continent that is broadly beneficial and sustainable for the long term. I really appreciate you underscoring that the policy and institutional support that the AMDC works to provide occurs in a very complex context. And it's in this complex context with a number of uncertainties and challenges where you feel the benefits of strategic foresight and anticipatory governance could really contribute, particularly sensing early detection of risks and opportunities and being able to ensure we're leveraging off technological innovations, but also that we're prepared for some of the different shifts, geological shifts, just energy transition that are facing the mining sector as a broader ecosystem. And building on your point around the importance of regional cooperation and integration and the need for integrated strategies across broader governance issues, perhaps I can invite Evans to provide some comments here, particularly around the role of multi-stakeholder engagement, given the complexities and perhaps some of the competing interests that the AMDC needs to negotiate as part of its mandate. What role do you think regional cooperation can play in enhancing the mining sector? What role do you think more participatory engagement of stakeholders can contribute to ensuring the Africa mining vision, the mandate of the AMDC are achieved? You're welcome, Evans, to share some thoughts and insights here.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Earlier on, I actually called you Karamo, Karabo, but you're not Karabo. I was like, that's not the person. Thank you so much, and thank you to SAIIA for inviting me to share some thoughts on these pregnant issues, if I may call them, of our time. I believe that the report that is being launched today has touched on very important areas. And I'm just going to highlight them for the listeners, those who have not had a chance to actually read the report. One is that the report is stressing the fact that there is a limited participation of local communities. This is a song that we have sung for so many times in meetings, and we ask, where are the communities? Why do we promote representation of communities rather than establishing agency among community members? The second is insufficient integration of diverse perspectives, particularly when it comes to decision-making processes. And the third highlight from this report is the whole issue of communication. And I really like the anticipatory governance that has been really dealt with sufficiently, and I don't want to go into it. It is a new concept, a concept that we need to embrace and appreciate, so that we can actually, if I may use the language, catch the thief before they knock at your door. So I will leave it there. But I also think that with these three items that the report has really brought out clearly, there are issues which I think that needs to be looked into deeply or in more detail, and that is strengthening community involvement. This is something that we can no longer gloss over. The second is to develop feedback mechanism. This is required so that we know where we are and to have some sort of temperature measurement on where we are at the implementation of these important initiatives and frameworks. The third is tailored capacity building. This is also something that needed to come out clearly in the report, but obviously this is a work in the making, and we build on blocks that have already been laid. And then the fourth is to enhance communication strategies. I think that is very important. But then Dr. Kitao has actually talked about integration, but I'm going to look at it from a different perspective. There is this interconnectedness or a nature of interconnection that mining brings within the relations, in relational aspects of African nations. And this is what I would call Africa to Africa and Africa to the world, whereby, you know, this comes from the fact that Africa actually owns approximately 30% of the world's mineral reserves. And the mining sector is pivotal for economic growth, job creation, geopolitical influence, and mining significantly influences national economies, trade, relations, and regional cooperation. So while Dr. Kitao actually talked about integration within Africa, I'm actually seeing this collaboration going beyond Africa, and it calls for greater responsibility and accountability on people who are actually involved in making sure that our resources are exploited in a manner that the posterity of our continent will actually also enjoy some of these things. The other thing about the importance of regional cooperation is to do with no one, as we know, no country can actually develop in isolation. And I can give you examples such as we see Uganda and Tanzania, we have an East African crude oil pipeline. Uganda could not do it on its own, and so they had to call on Tanzania to work with them. So I think that it is very important that this cooperation, if it is there, then would also help in building the infrastructure across Africa, of how people will travel, how goods will be transported from one point to another. And now we see with the example that I gave about the ECOP, how crude oil will be transported from Hoima in Uganda to Tanga. But I believe also that in a recent meeting in Nairobi, I was really pleased to hear about one of the impacts of AMV as a framework, where a participant from, I think it's from Mozambique actually shared how the AMV, was acted as a guideline to them to have a more digitized geological data information where now it can be accessible to everybody and no data is lost. And the other thing under this is that it's high time that we looked into the crucial role of regional frameworks, what they play. I mean, in Africa, we are really good in coming with these frameworks. I mean, we have AFTA, we have others which like APRIM, but also we have the recent ones which AMDC is actually working hard to make sure that they're being implemented. But we also have others outside of Africa, like the OECD and others, which I believe that we can name later, that could be used to make sure that the facilitation of knowledge sharing, capacity building, and best practices among member states are actually at the core of every discussion that they are making on how the resources are going to be exploited. Now, the second part is the challenges. We cannot have this discussion without talking about the challenges. And one of the challenges that is prevailing is in the mining sector is the issue of environmental degradation. Next to that is social conflict and economic disparities. If you were to go to Mufulira in Zambia, if you were to go to Kahama or other parts of Tanzania where mining activities take place, or even in Ghana, you'd realize that there are disparities when it comes to the accrued benefits. And the question which we often meet, some of us who go to the field, is, okay, you tell us that there is gold, show it to us on the ground, and we cannot show that. So we really need to work, this collaboration needs actually to remove these challenges so that we work as a people, as Africa. The second is the harmonized policies. I believe that Dr. Kitao has talked about this from a point of view of, having these policies in place, but harmonizing them. I know that there has been a lot of questions about what is the value, and is it harmonizing or standardization of the policies that would work for Africa? But I believe that harmonization is always taken as something that would help. It is also worth stressing that without cooperation, countries may fall into the race to the bottom. It has happened in the past, and we see it happening. And therefore, Africa as a continent, our leaders and those who are key players in this sector need to ensure that this divide and rule kind of policies and tactics, which have been employed for centuries, have to stop. And they are the ones who have to stop it when we think about what would become of Africa. And then again, we go to what we call the strategic foresighting principles. The fourth is conflict minerals. I think that you cannot talk about African minerals or minerals exploitation in the African continent without thinking about the impact that comes with conflict to the stability of our nations, both socially and economically, but even further, environmentally. One thing we have to keep in mind is the possibility that in the wake of exploitation or discussions towards exploitation of critical minerals, strategic minerals, Africa needs to really be on the watch that this will not actually happen. I know that, and we know that the minerals that we're talking about have caused a lot of problems. Take, for example, in the Congo, where, the 3 TGs have actually been the source of clashes and people losing their lives and livelihoods as well. The extraction and trade of these minerals often lead to human rights abuses as well. So I think that we also now need to talk about collaborating with local community members. And when we think about free, informed and prior consent, principles, we really need to put this into place so that when we talk about collaboration, the collaboration we talk about should not just be at the higher level. It should also go down to the people so that their concerns are taken to board when decisions are being made. And I believe that there is an importance, to talk about ethical sourcing. All this sounds more like new theories, but actually they have been there for some time. The other point that I needed to raise is responsible investment. And this now looks at different kind of collaboration or cooperation. This looks at public and private sector cooperations between governments and the private sector and other players. And this would actually lead to what we call sustainable mining. I have a list of things that I would have mentioned, but I think that time is of essence here. But I think that the role of investors in promoting sustainable practices through their investment choices is also key. And I think that in this case, since we are also talking about communication strategies, we need also to seriously think about how do we also reach the ears of shareholders, because these companies which come to Africa to operate in Africa have shareholders. And in recent years, there has been a wave of shareholders who want their shares, their investments to not harm anybody. So I believe that we need not only to talk with the investors, like the multinational corporations, the companies themselves, but we also need to talk with the shareholders who are behind these investments coming into Africa. And then lastly, but not least, I would actually just say that we should try as much as we can in ways that we could express these concepts to our leaders and other stakeholders in a manner that is understandable, in a manner that they can understand easily, that we should encourage the partners, that is government, private sector, the civil society, and the local communities, community members who are hosting these operations, to collaborate on the frameworks that promote responsible investment. And then there is also a need to advocate. And this is not just advocating, it's exerted advocacy strategy that will ensure that inclusion of local community in making processes is at the center of everything. So I think that I'll leave it there for now. And if there will be some questions, maybe I can chip in and add some more points. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Evans. And yes, I see that there are some questions and there'll be an opportunity for more engagement and interaction with those joining in on the webinar. And yes, your broadening of our discussion in terms of regional collaboration and cooperation to include more stakeholders, in particularly local communities that you note have had limited participation in the ways in which the mining sector is developing on the continent, is very important to consider. And I would like to kick a question back to Maritz as we sort of wrap up the panel discussions and open it up to receive some comments from the participants. A key point that Evans mentioned is that, yes, we need greater harmonization of policies to ensure responsible investment, to include different stakeholders, investors, shareholders, communities. And in highlighting the importance of these harmonized policies, Evans underscored that in particular, these harmonized policies are important for addressing the shared challenges across the continent, avoiding exploitation, ensuring prosperity, etc. What is the role, for instance, of ratifying regional frameworks, and how can ratification by member states of regional frameworks contribute to this enhanced broad stakeholder engagement, contribute to shared approaches to challenges that are faced across different African countries? Perhaps share a bit about the importance of ratification and maybe some of the challenges that the AMDC is facing in terms of playing a role in bringing this harmonized regional and broader regional collaboration in terms of the mining sector.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerry, and also Evans. You picked some of the things that he said, but yeah, and as he knows, we really try to involve local communities as well. We have platforms, not only for artisanal small-scale miners, but we're also trying to include women. We are we collaborate closely with the Association of Women in Mining in Africa, AWIMA, very strong ladies who work with, especially women that are really work on the ground, not only just small-scale mining, but geologists and women in general in the mining sector. We also have set up we work very much with associations of artisanal small-scale miners, and we really try to hear the voices of the local communities. Maybe not enough. But you also mentioned that we should work with outside of the region of Africa, which I was part of the Critical Energy Transition Minerals panel of the United Nations Secretary General. And we fought for some language on value addition, on benefit sharing communities, and on the economic diversification. And it doesn't come naturally to some of our external candidates that, you know, raw material extraction and exporting is no longer business as usual. This is why, again, coming to this anticipatory governance, we really need to have all the stakeholders and see our perspective. Sometimes it's really like they have a blind spot. That's what we realize. Like they do not see why they only focus on but you need skills, you need technology, you need capital, you need infrastructure, you need this. But we know that. And I think the world is shifting, that everybody is now, you know, trying to do processing and refining, and everybody else needs the technology, skills, capacity, capital, infrastructure. So we are all in the same game, but using these tools, this foresight, we can foresee, again, build the ecosystem around value addition, around economic diversification, so that we have a different conversation, be on the table and have a different conversation. The point I'm trying to make here is that we are aware of the externals, but since we're talking about challenges, what we lack, in my opinion, is the strong regional as Africa. Because if we speak as one language, and I'm going to answer your question about harmonization, it has been a challenge. I mean, we tried to do regional mining visions. The most advanced is the SADC region. At least it's going somewhere, at least there's a regional mining vision. But harmonization of policies, especially tax fiscal regimes, has been challenging for a number of reasons, which I will not get into. But that's why the focus, if we are united as one, as a market, even to attract investments outside, we are trying to have our own critical mass of African investors through this UMREC Park that I mentioned, but that's another conversation. But the reality is that we're still trying to attract investments from outside. So we have to really put our house in order so that we do not, somebody talked about race to the bottom, so they don't go with the one that has less tax or, you know, provide tax incentives, but harmonize our policy and put our house together. That's where you grow. That's why you have economies of scale. So we are also, and I'm trying to link it with the foresight, because that's really important. If we envision it and we foresee what difference we can make around regional integration and how we can increase our even geopolitical importance, is when that envisioning will provide also to governance and also to regions, SADC, ECOWAS, EAC, you name them, ECAS, to see, when they see what it could be also enhance our view. So about ratification, why ratification is important is because it gives us mandate. It gives us we already have a mandate as a specialized agency, but when you are endorsed by member states, and we do have 12 signatures, we have 4 ratifications. And interestingly, when we talk to these countries, they're all, why didn't we ratify? It's a bit complex process to ratify. It has to go through Council of Ministers, approved by government, goes to Parliament. And you know, there's also, I don't want to preempt what the Mentimeter would say, but for instance, this year, how many elections have we had in Africa? And most of them have changed the whole government. And unfortunately, we have to restart the process. We know about which countries we're talking about. There's no, you know, it does no handover. So we have to restart the conversation with the new ministers, with the new, that's one point. But the essence is that I think this foresighting will help us. It's not forecast. We're not forecasting, and I know the difference. We're just seeing, envisioning. I think it will help these decision makers see. And we should not just focus on ministries of mines, because you know, it's all about industrialization. It's about energy transition. It's about, so we need a whole of a coherence policy, and we need a whole of governance approach. That is why it's important to, if we have the mandate clearly, then we can design and implement coherent forward-looking policies, whether mining, industrial, environmental, energy, that takes into account. And also, you mentioned risk. This can help us. And Evans talked about conflict. Usually we talk about early warning systems when it comes to conflicts, you know, but even you can foresee what will be the risks. You know, I mentioned the stranded assets. What if they find alternatives to critical green minerals? You know, we know the likes of Elon Musk are trying to find alternatives because cobalt has issues. So what do you foresee? If it's not cobalt, then what else? LFP, there are other components that are still, so really, or, you know, we really need to be ahead of the game. So that would give us, again, if we are ratified, it would give us the mandate and also to further develop and implement risk assessments for this country. Sorry, the sun is on me. And again, for regional harmonization and capacity building, the same for infrastructure building, for shared infrastructure. If we envision it as if we have ratified, then it would give us more impetus, more mandates. You know, sometimes countries go and sign treaties or bilateral on their own. But if we are ratified AMDC, then we will have more weight, we believe, because we can say that, you know, you should not go alone and sign so deals with one group and one country, but we can have a regional approach to that. So it's really will give us, and somebody mentioned also the sustainability, but member state dues. We will not have to depend on outside funding only. If we are ratified, you know, the member states will have to contribute. But it's more than the contribution of member states. It's the political will and the signal it will send, and it will empower us more to be more bold about our policies, more bold about we already are trying to be, but it will give us more impetus. And as these critical minerals become more and more geopolitically in demand, and just as we, today or on the 18th, yesterday, G20 declaration came. And as you know, African Union has been a member of the G20 for the first time in the Brazilian presidency. And there was language on critical minerals and beneficiation at source. That gives us, why? Because we were at the table. AU was at the table. That's why we managed to get those kind of languages. We are also hoping in COP29 and others, so that we are actually on the table and then providing policy and strategic guidance. With ratification, it will give us even much more impetus. I hope I answered your question.
You did, Dr. Marit. Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of ratification to ensure that we have a shared stance, which also strengthens our international positioning in terms of critical minerals, mining, but also the broader ecosystem, governance issues, trade issues, and how this culture of regional integration and harmonization is not only relevant for the work you do at the AMDC, but is also important for other bodies such as the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and issues around governance. I think Evans mentioned the Africa Peer Review Mechanism. So yes, and on that note, we want to segue into inviting some questions from our participants. I see we already have Hank Smith with his hand up. Before we do that, it might be an opportune time to share some of the results from the Mentimeter with the contributions in terms of what our participants think is the most significant barrier to ratify the statutes for the AMDC. And Letitia, could I invite you to speak a bit to what the responses talk to and how this link in with the research from the Policy Insight paper?
Yes, thank you, Njeri. Yeah, I think we've got about 22 responses, which is pretty good. It's about a third. So key themes that come out of our word cloud is the inability to collaborate. Countries not sensitized, I would imagine not sensitized to ratification processes, a regional integration, how to come together, and then integration with CMBS. We've got governance coming out strong, private sector financing, geopolitics, cartels, lack of political will, fears of switching, which is talks to ability to cooperate. Also corruption, sneaking its ugly head out, political instability, not seeing the value, working together. I would imagine infrastructure challenges and lobbying with investors, poor categorization. I would imagine that's the categorization of minerals, limited awareness, and I can't see the last one, which is lack of cooperation on. Yeah, I can't see that last one. I think it just says lack of cooperation. Yeah, so yeah, I think the barriers, I think there's no surprise there. The key themes that obviously come across is, really getting regional integration is key. And really working collaboratively to address these interconnected and multifaceted challenges. Thanks, Njeri.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing some inputs there to all of those that responded to the Mentimeter. I'm not sure if the Mentimeter is closed. I think it might be closed, but interesting to see that the responses there were also picked up by the comments from Dr. Kitao, by the comments from Evans in terms of the importance of regional integration and ratification and some of the challenges. Let's open up the floor. It would be great to hear your voices. And we also note that there's been some questions coming in through the chat as well. Hank, I see your hand has been raised for a while. I'm not sure if you have lowered it now, but I did see your hand, Hank, and I also see Kofi Kwaku's hand as well. Hank, if you're online, you're very welcome to unmute and raise your question. I'll ask all contributors to please keep it brief and to the point so we can ensure we get as many inputs as possible. Hank, the floor is yours. Otherwise, I will hand it over to Kofi. Okay, Kofi, I suggest you can ask your question or make your comment.
Okay, thanks very much, Jerry. Thanks for a great piece of work and policy. I have a few things to add. I would suggest, by the way, I'm with the Vitt School of Governance, where I've been for many years, and hello to all of you there. I want to make sure that the policy brief can make visible a couple of things, especially around what the policy brief called, Letitia called shifts required. So in addition, it may be buried into those three shifts. But for me, ownership and governance of critical minerals is very important, especially the term ownership. I took the time to go through the whole policy document. There's not one word that says ownership. And I think assuming that ownership is close to beneficiation is wrong. I assume that ownership beneficiation is more like it gives the impression that the leftovers handed down to the lowest levels of the critical mineral chain value. This is how I feel to communities, to people in rural areas, poor people. So to elevate it and make it more visible, the term ownership must come back, or must be introduced into this policy. I know it's a challenge. And in fact, the future of ownership and the governance of critical minerals is perhaps one of the most important piece of work that this policy document should consider. What is it going to look like? Who are the people there? And there's no confusion with stakeholders, investors, and so forth. I mean, who are the people owning this for the long term? And I think to close this, for the long term, I think it may not be possible at this stage, but I think the African Union should consider adding that as one of the pillars. There is no way we can talk about the future of critical African minerals and then not mention that. And I think Evans sort of touched it a little bit, but the term ownership didn't appear. And I would also I may have missed this part as well very quickly, that kind of long term that the policy paper is talking about must be made also visible. Is just the next 50 years, 35 years, 100 years, and so forth. And I think this is my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kofi. Your contribution is well noted and welcome, highlighting that this policy insight is part of a series of special reports. And yes, while indeed the issue of ownership could be better highlighted, the context of the Africa Mineral Development Center, I think assumes some level of ownership, but I do appreciate your questioning and the need for us to be critical in our analysis there. Just to highlight that some of our previous papers have looked at the strategic policy pathways till about 2035, so in the next 10 years or so, and looked at issues of anticipatory governance, exploring the broader ecosystem, and ensuring ownership of value chains. Letitia is also working on a value chains policy brief that will be shared as well. So thank you for highlighting the importance of reiterating this very critical issue.
And I wanted to add something very quickly. One of the expression that I should have mentioned was the idea of what's been called resource nationalism. And more people are using that to claim ownership of the resources for their countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kofi. I see Marit was nodding and keen to contribute. Please go ahead, Marit, before we open up the floor for some more questions and comments.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to come to this very important issue of ownership. I tried to mention that, it was a little bit missing from the 4 pillars. I mentioned that, critical mass of African investors, because that's the surest way of owning your resources is to invest yourself in it, because otherwise, so I mentioned AMREC Park, Africa Minerals Energy Classification and Resources Classification, which is an African instrument which which really like harmonizes and standardizes the way we see reserves, and it's a possibility of leveraging capital markets so that African investors can have the capital that is needed to invest in the country. That is a way of ownership. That is the best, surest way, and we are really working towards that. Now we have Amrek Park and others to do that. So the surest way is to create African investors, African capital to invest. And on the issue of resource nationalism, I totally do not like the word resource nationalism. It's just claiming what is yours. That's not nationalism. It has a negative connotation, and usually they put it as a risk in the private sector, but it's really claiming what is yours. And I do not feel that is called. Maybe it could be a resource sovereignty, but we call it, we do not subscribe to this resource nationalism notion. So we are really claiming, like I said, we are in the process of being on the table in a lot of these conversations, and we are trying to be more bold. But again, realistically, that's why we need these foresights, because we have to be real, because at the end of the day, realistic visioning is what we need. Because if you do not have the required African investors, then how do we talk about ownership? Yes, joint ventures. Yes, other, like also for technology transfer, but it doesn't come deliberately. You have to have policies, you have to have a say. We look into China, how they were doing it. And now it's interesting now, I was reading this morning that the EU is now trying to get technology transfer from the Chinese, which WTO does not allow you in some of the schemes. But it's a bit complicated. But what I'm trying to say is that ownership is at the source, is at the core of what we're trying to do at AMDC. But what this Foresight's anticipatory governance does that is to be realistic and be looking at it from a very pragmatic way, and not just have some, and I think all of us, AMV, I saw somebody saying that AMV is outdated. Yes, that was 2009. We are reviewing it, especially the action plan and the African Minerals Governance Framework, because now we have critical minerals, we call them green, we have an African Green Mineral Strategy, things are shifting, so our focus is also shifting, although the core is the same. So the point is that, we are all tired of just talking. We want action, so realistic action, not just pipe dreams. But that's why this anticipatory governance and foresight helps us to ensure that we are in the realm of our reality and our context. Sorry to again be long.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Kitao, for emphasizing a practical understanding of what ownership means within the mining sector. I see Letitia and Evans might also want to offer some contributions, some quick comments, so we can welcome a few more questions.
Thank you, Njeri. I'd just like to add to Kofi's point as well. So, and just for all the participants, so for those of you who don't already know, all the minerals that get mined on the African continent are traded on the capital markets of London and New York. So when we drive the issue of ownership, the question is, do we continue serving those capital markets? Or, as Dr. Murad said earlier, through the structures such as Amrek Park, do we create alternative mechanisms for Africans on the African continent to use those mechanisms, and then in so doing, access finance through capital markets for the African continent? I think for me, a very big thing is, and I don't know if we'll see it in our lifetime, is to have the minerals traded on the African continent through African capital markets. And I think that's when we get to the crux of the conversation around ownership.
Thank you, Letitia. Evans.
Well, I think that Letitia has just talked about something that I really wanted to touch on, but I would just like to take the example of Tanzania. When we talk about markets, I believe that we need to harness markets in our own countries. And I think that when we talk about this, again, it goes to touch on issue of value addition, which I believe that the AMDC has put a lot of effort in making sure that the mineral value addition in Africa. At least they've started with gemstones. And I hope that their collaboration with, industrial minerals, will actually come to also have some of those construction minerals. But I think that we need a whole infrastructure in Africa that empowers the person who is involved within to make the market here more attractive to other people to come, just as much as you remember when the structural adjustment policies were introduced to Africa and other parts of developing world. I believe that what they wanted was to have investor-friendly kind of policies. So if we really want the African market to serve the needs of the African investors, then I believe that we need to take baby steps to establishing our local markets and have our own London somewhere here. When you talk about gold, we need to have our own Switzerland here so that the market, those who are interested would actually come here. And Letitia has also just touched on, when you go and you trade your gold and your minerals in England or other parts of the world, who benefits? They benefit because you go there, you sleep there. I'm not an economist, but I'm taking those basic things that actually bring some revenues into the country. And the taxes are not really coming back here into those countries. So that's the only thing I can say. I needed to say something, but I think that you are not yet there. There are some questions in the Q and
just about to get to that. I wanted to actually suggest that for the questions in the Q&A, so we can hear maybe one or two more voices. Perhaps the panelists would like to put in a few notes. I see Dion has already contributed. There's an interesting question around how can African American organizations, HBCUs, and firms collaborate with the AMDC. Perhaps, Dr. Merritt, that is one you can respond to. And as you go through those and maybe add a few comments, let me invite Ike Bensa to make a quick input. We have a few more minutes. If you could keep it brief and to the point, you're welcome to contribute. You would need to unmute yourself, Mr. Bensa.
Oh yeah, hi. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. My background is in regional integration and communication, and I have a special interest in seeing how there's more institutional synergies, especially among the AU institutions. I want to believe that when the ECA said in its report back in 2019, in reference to the African Continental Free Trade Area, that the AfCFTA was not just about intra-African trade, but it was about dispelling the crisis of implementation around AU programming and validating Agenda 2063. There was something there that we missed. We're trying to find out what was it about the African Continental Free Trade Area that got so many member states that for now we have about 48 ratifications, and almost everything else that's around the AU ratification has slowed down. So if there is some kind of magic around the African Continental Free Trade Area, if it was about intra-African trade, we know it's at the end of the day, it's all about industrialization. What is the challenge in bringing the African Continental Free Trade Area, identifying the industrialization link, bringing them to the table and finding out what can be done for them to carry along this conversation on the ratification? I want to believe that there's a certain responsibility that the African Continental Free Trade Area must begin to have in some of these conversations as well. It isn't just serving as a secretariat for member states on how they're sorting out tariffs and whatever else. It's about if we truly say that you're going to serve a common market, a customs union by 2034, and all these things that come with the Abuja Treaty, then there must be greater synergy among the AU institutions. And so for me, this challenge of the ratification, I want to believe that there needs to urgently be a conversation with the African Continental Free Trade Area, linking them up with the industrialization side and finding out what can be done guide them to ensure that this conversation of the AMDC's ratification can be fast-tracked? Thank you.
Well received. Thank you very much for that suggestion. And I do believe it's one of the points picked up in the policy insight as well, that the AMDC is working across the AU bodies to draw inspiration from successful initiatives, including the Africa CDC, Centers for Disease Control, also working with AUDA-NEPAD, the African Union Development Agency, and New Partnership for Africa's Development. And certainly, I believe there are some insights that could be drawn from ACTFA, as you rightly point out. Thank you very much for that comment. Henk, I see you're back. I'm not sure if you had wanted to contribute. We have about 1.5 more minutes. If you would still like to make your point, you're welcome to. If not, Alimi Salifu, a quick comment from yourself, please. If you could keep it short, you're welcome. You can also use the chat. Hi,
All right.
Ali. Yes,
Thank
if you could give a quick comment.
Yeah, thank you very much for this program. I'm Ali Misalifu, founder of Partnership for Future Generations in Africa. And what many of the things that have been said resonate with what we are looking for: intergenerational fairness and also intragenerational fairness across continent. Talking about ownership of minerals, I have a question for the panelists. You know, 2 years ago, Mali, Niger, and, Burkina Faso pulled out of ECOWAS because issues around, nuclear, uranium in Niger, gold in Mali, and others in, Burkina Faso were part of the issue, taking ownership of resources. So my question is, do you think that, this is the way to go? Because according to what we are reading, Mali, has paid off its IMF debt and international debt. So is this another way to take ownership of our, natural resources? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we close our Q&A and our inputs from the participants. Thank you very much for your comments and questions, your suggestions for adding richness to the policy insight discussions. I want to offer a quick 1 minute to each of our panelists with just some wrap-up comments, maybe some final contributions to the questions raised. Really brief, but just as a way to summarize our discussions before we close formally. We have reached 1/2 the hour, and I want to ensure that we allow our participants to depart as per the agenda. But Dr. Kitao, Evans, Letitia, a quick closing comment from yourselves, please.
Yes, a very quick one. I totally agree with the Bensa about the need to coordinate with other African Union institutions. With regards to the AfCFTA, there's not just the treaty, but they are also, they are working also on industrialization and also on the automotive sector. Sometimes they do not see the direct link with the minerals, but it's a bridge that we are trying to cross currently. And then, as Bensa was saying, they have all the ratification in the world. They had the champions and ratifications, but then, sometimes you wonder, is ratification the solution for implementation? It is somewhat, and momentum was created because they had champions. AMV, and now there's a moratorium on champions, so we cannot have champions for the AMV or the AMDC, but there are some areas that we can emulate. With regards to CDC Africa, health is obviously less contentious than minerals, but at the end of the day, why CDC Africa evolved is during COVID times, because there was clearly, and this decarbonization agenda could be our COVID. That's what we see, how we see it. And it has picked up some momentum. Maybe where we sit at AMDC, we see that momentum going. Sometimes we need these foresights to ensure that our governments see it the way we see it, because we sit in a lot of panels. We see the shifting, the momentum created around critical green minerals, but maybe our leaders or our regions do not see it. And to the question of is the ownership, again, with regards to Mali, Burkina, and Niger, it's a political issue, but I think that the core of AMV, again, is to ensure that not only value is created on the continent, but also we have ownership of our destiny. Maybe not minerals as well, because at the end of the day, you have the licenses, etc. And we try to explain about the capital markets and how these are traded, and also the mining investors. But the end goal, the envisioning, is that we own our resources and we transform our lives through our resources. That's the envisioning that we do with the Foresight. I ended there.
Thank you. Thank you for that powerful close, Dr. Merritt. Evans.
For me, I think that I have two areas. One is the disconnectedness of discussions. And I would just like to dive in and say that Africa suffers a few key challenges. And I believe that these have been touched in the course of our discussion. One is policy fragmentation. Then policy fragmentation also goes hand in hand with economic interest of different countries. And that is also supported strongly by divide and rule kind of policies that we have, from the investors community. The second is limited community engagement, which we've talked about and cannot be stressed enough. There are issues of environmental degradation, economic disparities, insufficient data, but these are things that I believe are being dealt with step by step by AMDC, and I believe that Dr. Kitao has actually talked much at length about this. There was a question about the involvement or the engagement of the youth, and I think that it is proper to say that when we talk about collaboration among stakeholders, young people can significantly contribute to regional economic integration of mineral resources through advocacy for youth involvement. And right now I see that there are a number of youth associations or initiatives coming up. In Tanzania, we have one. In Kenya, I think that there is a discussion that is happening sometime this month. And I believe that there should be some focused awareness creation, but more than that, there should be some focused training among young people, the youth, on issues such as entrepreneurship in mineral beneficiation, community engagement, again, to represent local interest, and promoting sustainable mining activities. But that also, I think, that should target our learning institutions. When you look at YouTube, I'll use this as a closing. When you look at YouTube, the button phones that we are using nowadays, I saw one YouTube clip that showed that actually primary school students are making them in China. What are we doing to make sure that this sense of ownership that we are talking about, this nationalistic attitude towards exploitation of our, not just exploitation, but governance of our resources, how early do we begin to instill this knowledge in our young people? Some of us, like me, I started understanding it when I started working as a professional. But I knew that some people in my family were actually miners, but I believe that AMDC, one of the things, this is a gigantic responsibility, but I think that AMDC needs to guide the continent on how to go, collaborating with institutions such as SAIIA and other knowledge-based institutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Evans, for re-emphasizing the importance of collaboration, stakeholder involvement, including the youth, and that we remain working on the challenges that have been so well highlighted here. Thanks also for your vote of confidence in the role of the AMDC as a key player in the transformative futures of mining for the continent. Letitia, a closing remark from you before we say goodbye.
Thank you, Njeri. I think, if you say you're going on a transformative change journey, it's not an easy step. It's not an easy task, and it's also not a linear path. And if I just reflect on all the comments and questions from our very active participants on this webinar, then it echoes that. And I think deep down, Dr. Meredith also mentioned that, you know, she can see the change coming forward, which I believe to be very, very, very confirming that, yes, we are on this journey together and we can tip the system. And I think for me, that is a very good positive impact. Just to add that we're also busy writing a second policy briefing, and it will focus on mining value chains, African mining value chains, and we're also looking at it from an innovative financial perspective. So just watch the space. They will definitely invite all of you to that launch again.
Thank you so much, Letitia. Yes, we welcome all our participants to continue their engagement on these very important issues. There are a number of knowledge resources from within the AU themselves, from partners such as Evans Rubara, broader stakeholder groups, and definitely from ourselves at SAIIA. It's been a real pleasure to discuss the ways in which the African Minerals Development Center, the ways in which the AMDC is truly shifting ground, the challenges around it, but especially the importance of a strategic foresight and anticipatory governance approach, a framework that can contribute to a transformative African mining future that's truly beneficial to all stakeholders. We welcome you to continue engaging with our panelists. I do believe their social media information is available. And thank you so much for your attention in this webinar. We'll be sharing the recording as well as the PowerPoint presentations. And with that, it's a wrap. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to the participants. Have a good rest of the day.